The forbidden symphony, when love betrays. If someone had told me that I'd betray the man who rescued me from despair, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, staring at the wreckage of my choices. The worst part. I'm not sure if I regret it. These words replay in my mind as I sit in the empty church, the air thick with incense and silence. My fingers tremble as I clutch the piano keys, the notes hauntingly out of tune. This is not where I thought my life would end up. This is not who I thought I'd become. But let me take you to the beginning, or rather, the middle. The storm came down with a vengeance that night, slamming the world into chaos as thunder cracked like a whip in the distance. Inside Gideon's sprawling home, Mara stood in the dim light of the kitchen, drying her hands after washing the dishes. The rain outside matched the tempest within her, though she refused to admit it, not even to herself. Kain, her stepson, emerged from the hallway, his presence filling the room like an unspoken challenge. He was soaked from head to toe, rain dripping from his hair and pooling around his feet. Mara jumped, startled by his sudden appearance. "You're drenched," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "What were you thinking, running out in a storm like this?" Kain smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Needed to clear my head. Guess I didn't think it would rain this hard." Something about the way he looked at her, a flicker of defiance mixed with curiosity, made Mara's chest tighten. She busied herself with a towel, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Go dry off before you catch a cold," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. But Kain didn't move. His voice cut through the air, low and deliberate. "You're always so tense, Mara." "Why?" Her breath caught. He had a way of asking questions that felt too close to the truth, peeling back the layers she'd carefully constructed. She hated it and craved it all at once. Mara's marriage to Gideon had been a calculated leap of faith, a way to escape the shadows of her past and build a future grounded in stability and purpose. But Gideon was a man married not just to her but to his ministry and his late wife's memory. Ruth had been the paragon of virtue, the saint everyone adored, and her loss left Gideon emotionally distant, immersed in sermons and charity work that often left Mara alone. The house, large and cold, was filled with the echoes of Ruth, her pictures, her favorite Bible verses framed on the walls, even her favorite seat left untouched in the living room. Mara quickly realized she wasn't just married to Gideon, she was married to Ruth's legacy, a ghost haunting her every move. Kain, on the other hand, was a wildfire, a young man who burned with a need to be seen, to be heard, to live outside the suffocating expectations his father placed on him. Music was his rebellion, gospel rap his weapon of choice. His lyrics were raw and unfiltered, weaving tales of loss, of faith, and defiance that Mara couldn't ignore. Their late-night music sessions became her solace, a place where the piano notes carried both of their unspoken truths. One night, as they worked on a new piece, Kain's fingers brushed hers on the keys. It was accidental, or at least that's what she told herself, but the jolt that shot through her was undeniable. She pulled her hand back as though burned, her breath uneven. "I'm sorry," Kain said, though his voice was heavy with something unspoken. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Mara interrupted, standing abruptly. "We should stop for tonight." But as she turned to leave, Kain's voice stopped her. "Mara, don't you ever feel trapped? Like this isn't the life you were meant to have?" She froze, her back to him, his words cutting through her defenses like a blade. "You don't know anything about my life," she replied, her voice trembling. "Maybe not," he said, his tone softening. "But I know what it feels like to want something you can't have." The tension between them grew unbearable, each encounter a minefield of stolen glances and charged silences. Mara tried to avoid him, pouring herself into church activities and Gideon's increasingly demanding schedule. But Kain was always there, a storm she couldn't outrun. One evening, the power went out during a storm, plunging the house into darkness. Mara lit a lantern and found Kain in the living room, staring out the window at the torrential rain. "You're going to hurt yourself walking around in the dark," she said, trying to sound casual. He turned to her, the flickering lantern casting shadows across his face. "What's the point of avoiding the dark when it's already inside you?" Her heart stopped. "Kain, don't." But he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I see you, Mara. I see the way you smile at church, the way you pretend to be happy. But I know you're not. You're as trapped as I am." She backed away, her heart pounding. Whatever this is, it has to stop." "Then stop me," he challenged, his voice raw and desperate. Their forbidden connection unfolded like a symphony of chaos, each moment more intoxicating than the last. Mara knew the risks, knew that one misstep could destroy everything. But Kain's passion ignited something within her that she thought had died long ago. He made her feel alive, seen, desired. As their secret meetings grew more frequent, so did the guilt. Gideon, oblivious to the storm brewing under his roof, continued his tireless work for the church, often praising Mara for her steadfast faith. The irony was suffocating, and Mara felt the walls closing in. The climax came during the church's annual revival service. Gideon delivered a powerful sermon about sin and redemption, his voice booming through the sanctuary. Mara sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart a battlefield of fear and longing. From across the room, Kain's eyes found hers. The intensity of his gaze was too much to bear, and she quickly looked away. But the damage was done. In that fleeting moment, Mara knew their secret wouldn't stay buried for long. The night Mara and Kain crossed the point of no return, the storm outside mirrored the chaos inside their souls. The forbidden kiss, a culmination of weeks of unresolved tension, was the spark that ignited a wildfire neither could contain. Their passion consumed them in the dark, a reckless union of loneliness and longing that neither could rationalize. For weeks, they hid behind the facade of normalcy, meeting in secret corners of the house while Gideon was out ministering to others, completely oblivious to the fire smoldering in his own home. Kain's gospel rap transformed during this time, growing rawer and more emotional, each lyric a dangerous confession cloaked in metaphor. And Mara, she began to wear guilt like a second skin, her every interaction with Gideon tainted by the secret she carried. But secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how tightly woven they seem. It was a seemingly ordinary Sunday morning when everything fell apart. Gideon was scheduled to deliver his sermon on the power of forgiveness to a packed congregation. Mara had accompanied him to church, her hands trembling as she sat in the front pew. Kain was supposed to meet them later, but his absence wasn't unusual. He often rebelled against his father's rigid schedule. Midway through the sermon, Gideon paused, his voice faltering as he looked out into the congregation. In the back row, Kain had entered, disheveled, his eyes blazing with anger. "Dad," Kain's voice cut through the silence, halting the service. "What's the point of preaching forgiveness if you can't even see what's happening under your own roof?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion etched on every face. Mara's heart stopped, her blood turning to ice. She tried to catch Kain's eye, silently begging him to stop, but it was too late. Kain stepped forward, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. "Ask your wife," he spat. "Ask her who she really loves." The room erupted in chaos, whispers escalating to gusts and accusations. Gideon stood frozen in the pulpit, his face a mask of disbelief. Mara wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs refused to move. The days following Kain's outburst were a whirlwind of devastation. News of the scandal spread like wildfire, turning Gideon's once revered church into a battleground of judgment and shame. Congregants whispered behind closed doors, questioning the pastor's ability to lead when his own home was in shambles. Gideon confronted Mara and Kain that night in the very house where their betrayal had unfolded. His pain was palpable, his voice trembling as he demanded answers. Mara tried to explain, but what words could justify the unforgivable? Kain, defiant as ever, admitted everything, his honesty cutting through the room like a blade. "You were never there for either of us," Kain accused his father. "You were too busy saving the world to notice we were drowning." Gideon's response was cold and measured, a stark contrast to the fury in his eyes. "I gave you everything, Kain. And you chose to repay me by destroying the one thing I had left." Mara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Gideon, I never meant for this to happen." "Don't," Gideon interrupted, his voice breaking. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed God, this family, and everything we built together." The scandal rocked Gideon's ministry to its core. Attendance plummeted as members left, unwilling to be associated with a church mired in such controversy. The board of elders convened emergency meetings, debating whether Gideon should step down. His sermons lost their power, his once commanding voice now weighed down by the burden of betrayal. But amidst the ruins, there was an unexpected glimmer of hope. Some congregants, those who believed in the message of redemption, rallied behind Gideon, urging him to use this trial as a testament to God's grace. They saw his pain and reminded him that even the strongest could falter, that forgiveness was not just a sermon but a way of life. Gideon reluctantly agreed to stay on, but he knew things would never be the same. The church would always bear the scars of what had happened, a constant reminder of his family's fall from grace. Mara left the house shortly after the confrontation, unable to face Gideon's silent judgment or the weight of her own guilt. She moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, spending her days in quiet reflection. The piano, once a source of joy, now stood silent in the corner, its keys untouched. Kain, too, disappeared, leaving behind only a cryptic note, "I need to find myself. Don't look for me." His music, once a balm for his soul, became a haunting reminder of the life he'd left behind. He drifted from city to city, performing in small clubs under a pseudonym, his songs a mixture of pain and hope. Gideon remained steadfast in his commitment to rebuild what had been lost. He poured himself into the church, not out of obligation but out of a newfound understanding of the human condition. His sermons, though smaller in audience, resonated more deeply, touching on themes of forgiveness, redemption, and the complexity of love. The story of Gideon, Mara, and Kain is one of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, growth. While their actions led to destruction, they also uncovered truths that had long been buried. Gideon learned that faith is not a shield against pain but a tool to navigate it. Mara discovered the depths of her own brokenness and began the slow journey of self-forgiveness. And Kain, though lost, found freedom in his music, a way to channel his emotions and heal. In time, the church began to heal as well. It became a place not of judgment but of understanding, its members learning to embrace the messiness of life and the power of second chances. Though the scars remained, they served as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. For Gideon, Mara, and Kain, the road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Rubicon had been crossed, and there was no going back. All that remained was to move forward, one step at a time.